something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I got to beware.
Hello, welcome to Occupy TV. My name is Ben. I'm here today with Grace, Gedden, and Geneva. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about Cascadia Forest Defenders. We're going to talk about what our work is, our history, where we fit in with the wider Earth First movement, some upcoming events, and some things that people should be watching out for. So I want to start with what is or who are the Cascadia Forest Defenders?
Well, Cascadia Forest Defenders have been around for well over 10 years, quite a long history in the area. Some of the more notable campaigns that have been worked on in the past was sort of, CFD has formation largely at the Warner Creek campaign. And then beyond that, working with the Fall Creek, Windberry, Straw Devil, and it's pretty much a long history within the Eugene community. I myself have been part of helping out with CFD since 2000, the first time I went up into a tree at Fall Creek. And so I'm still excited to be able to come back to Eugene and get plugged back into this group that I have such a long history with. And it's very exciting. It's one of the within the Northwest region as a whole. CFD has probably had the longest continued history of being out in the forest, defending that, like the native forests, and it's a pretty exciting group to be a part of. So
CFD has had a long history, working on a lot of campaigns. What have some of those campaigns focused on? Like, you've talked about how it's local, but what are some things they try to defend? We try to defend.
Well, some of the more, it's generally focusing around some of the more egregious timber sales, historically on national forest lands. And there's been side projects that have sort of branched out from CFD. Back in Fall Creek, one of the strategies that was used at Fall Creek to actually ended up help getting the Clark timber sale dropped entirely was starting a survey for red tree voles. And so being part of so it was just sort of someone came up and said, look, there are these survey managed protocols in place, and so if we can, while occupying these forests, if we can start looking for arboreal mammals that are sensitive, we can then start getting whole huge chunks of these tumor cells cut out. And so that was sort of the inception of the group NEST, which is also still continuing on today.
What does NEST stand for?
It's Northwest Ecosystem Survey Team.
Cool.
And they have a very long history as well, going into contentious timber sales and looking for arboreal mammals. And having been part of a lot of these groups in the past, it's one of the most sort of inspiring elements to be able to go back into these areas. Like the first tree I ever climbed, back in 2000, is still standing, largely because of the efforts of CFD in conjunction with a lot of the other groups sort of locally, like Cascadia Wildlands Project and some of the other nonprofits. Oregon Wild helped out with that as well. If people haven't experienced some of the old growth forests of Cascadia, that's definitely sort of one of the major draws and major focuses of my entire existence or my life is trying to protect these places. And if you go out into these areas that have 200 feet plus tall Douglas firs that are ancient intact ecosystems, and you see the fact that these companies are constantly still going in and trying to log them, it's an incredible impetus to be out there and be motivated to protect these places. CFD has had a lot of positive experiences like those sales I've already mentioned. There's also been numerous losses. We've gone out to many, many places and poured our hearts and efforts into these spots just to see them being logged and cut. But we keep coming back, and that's sort of the important aspect, is that we refuse to be disheartened, be disenfranchised, and become jaded, even though we do see these losses. But being out into the forest and just spending time there and being involved in groups that actively protect and put their bodies on the line in defense of these places is probably the most empowering thing that anyone can possibly do.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's been interesting the last several years. My understanding, I've only been involved with the group for about 2 years now, is that it goes through several incarnations, we're always amazed how much support we have in the community and how much support there are from older generations of activists, either with Cascadia Forest Defenders or part of the wider Earth First movement. So CFD is a group of people that works to stop the destruction of wild places. It's sort of fitting under the umbrella of Earth First. Some of you who are watching this episode may be familiar with that term, but I figured we could take this time on camera to talk more about what Earth First is, what sort of its movement, if we want to, I think that's a good term, what's the Earth First movement about? So get in, Grace, if you want to jump into, Geneva, if you feel comfortable. So.
Well, Earth First has been around since the early 80s. I think 1980 was sort of credited as the year that Earth First was formed. And it has a huge history nationwide and even globally. In Oregon specifically, one of the very first blockades that happened was Bald Mountain. That was like the, I believe, mid-80s. Was when Bald Mountain blockades were being taken. And so it has... Earth First it's still a national movement. It's gone through it's changed over the years. It's sort of evolved and sort of a sort of an amorphous group of any individual that acts in defense of the Earth with sort of some basic principles can be pretty much considered an Earth Firster. And so it's CFD used to be the Southern Willamette Earth First. It's changed its name it has reasons. And there's also, there's formations of Earth First group now. Reformation of the Earth First group in Portland as Cascadia Earth First. There's been Earth First groups in Ashland. The Mazama Forest Defense was sort of the Earth First group in Ashland back in the day. Earth First is, it's the ragtag group of miscreants and malcontents going out and doing what they can to protect the wild places left on the planet. And this is definitely not consigned specifically to forest ecosystems. You have active Earth First groups like defending every element of wild space. And so,
Yeah, we were just in Florida for the last Earth First Climbers Guild camp, and there's actually fairly active Earth First groups on the East Coast and in the Southeast. So that was really interesting to go climb some trees in Florida, of all places. And the Earth First Journal right now is based in Lake Worth, Florida, which is near Palm Beach, but nothing like Palm Beach at all. And it's really interesting I think that my conception of Earth First before I went to the East Coast was definitely all in forest activism. So to go see how Earth First groups are actually all over the country fighting coal, fighting nuclear, fighting deforestation in other places, so on and so forth. That's been pretty inspiring.
Totally, and I think you sort of bring up the good point of that while Earth First is generally very much structured within and seen within the environmental movement, we also have a focus on that we need to be active is a big part of it too, of that a lot of ways we do take action for these things, but not necessarily only on environmental issues. So like in Florida, you explained to me a little while back about a lot of the problems with development, and that we've seen with the wider Occupy movement that people who call themselves Earth Firsters have worked a lot with the Occupy movement. And so it's not just confined to environmental issues. It's sort of it's definitely within the spectrum of wider grievances of modern society and the 1%.
Well, I think that the place where we cross over with the Occupy movement is in the way that capitalism is affecting everything. It's affecting people, human rights, and it's affecting the environment. And I think it's important for Earth First to remain distinct because we play the role of, the name says it, Earth First. So even if I think that a lot of people who do Earth First activism also work on other issues. There's people in Florida who I've met who work on immigration rights. They also work on Earth First issues. But it's important for there to be a group that is there for the environment first before anything else.
So Earth First definitely forms coalitions with other groups for broader. I think there's obviously a direct Earth First Occupy sort of vested interest in helping out and being part of each other. As Grace, what you were saying, it is the 1% per se that is calling the shots It is their infrastructure and their companies and their sort of their will to power that is determining that is sort of driving the destruction of the forest. And so it's not necessarily a separate issue. So I do encourage people to sort of like broaden sort of the perspective necessarily on what exactly occupy can mean, and because if we're actively occupying we're addressing the grievances towards the 1%, and my grievances towards the 1%, like who do you think controls the Bonneville Dam? You know, like who do you think is sort of the proprietors of all the largest logging companies? Like they're definitely linked, and so there's definitely a lot of common ground there. And Earth First, of course, is definitely an international movement as well. Some of the very first blockades were actually done in Australia, and so. There's definitely a strong tie between a lot of the campaigns that go on internationally as well.
You bring up a good point that it isn't a stretch or anything like that to say the environmental movement and the Occupy movement are related. They're one and the same in a lot of ways, right? And that both of us have grievances with those in power destroying the world. And I think these groups work a lot together just because they see like the common issues and common problems. So we talked a little bit about Earth First, we've talked a little bit about CFD, and you mentioned how a lot of the campaigns in Cascadia, the Northwest in the past, have been focused on federal land, on Bureau of Land Management, and Forest Service, and stuff like that. I want to transition into the current campaign of Cascadia Forest Defenders, which is focused in the Elliott State Forest. And one of the biggest distinctions between our current campaign on state forest land and federal land is that there is a difference in laws. A lot of the victories that radical environmentalists, that Earth First groups have worked on have made it that it's easier to appeal decisions on federal lands. It's easier to get a lawsuit. More things are protected. And not to say that those organizations are reformed, but it is easier to have good environmental policy on those lands. But state forest is a whole different issue. So since 2009, Cascadia Forest Defenders has started a campaign on state forest land. And Grace, do you want to take this one around?
Sure.
Okay.
So the current campaign of Cascadia Forest Defenders is mostly focused on the Elliott State Forest, state-owned land. It's 93,000 acres. That is between, if you know where Reed Sport is, and Coos Bay. So it's in the coastal range southwest of Eugene. And there's also other state forest land in Oregon, in the Clatsop and the Tillamook. And we do talk about that some in our messaging because it's also affected by the same laws and policies, but our active campaign is in the Elliott. The Elliott is being managed similar to private forest land in that there's not really much protection of it. They clear cut pretty much any size tree, which is very distinct from the way national forest land is now treated. So they're clear cutting the Elliott State Forest at a rate of, it was 500 acres a year, now it's 850 acres a year. It was increased from 500 to 850 acres per year after the State Land Board, which is comprised of the governor, the treasurer, and the secretary of state. They approved a plan that increased the logging. It nearly doubles it. So there are very clear targets in our campaign, being that the people in power, the governor has made explicit decisions that affect how much is going to be clear cut every year in the Elliott State Forest. The reason the Elliott State Forest is being logged at that rate is because there's a mandate in our state constitution that this land has to be used to benefit public schools. And sorry, son, you take a breath. So it does benefit public schools, but through this thing called the Common School Fund, it adds a small amount of money to that pot every year. But the amount of money that's contributed to public schools is probably, well, it is less than 1% of the total public school budget for the state of Oregon. So it's an insignificant amount, and the loss is of one of our last coastal temperate rainforests that's still intact in Oregon. While about 5% of 5 to 10% of our forests as a whole are still intact. In Oregon, on the coastal range, it's under 3% now.
So you've talked a little bit about the campaign. Let's talk more about the Elliott State Forest specifically. Like, how big is it? What's sort of the history of that landscape? And maybe you could go into a little bit of what the campaign of Cascadia Forest Defenses looked like on the Elliott State Forest.
Sure. So the history of the forest, that area, and probably the reason why so much of it is still intact, is because there was a fire on the land over 150 years ago, and all of the forest regrew naturally after the fire. What it meant, though, is that when most of the logging in that area was happening, the forest was still too young for people to consider it profitable to go in there. It's very steep. The slopes, it's often, they're cliffs oftentimes, so it's to build roads into that area and to log in the area is very dangerous and expensive. So only recently have the trees become big enough that it was worth it to really start diving into the forest. And so for the last 20 years, they've started doing the clear cutting of the forest, which is about 150 years old. A little off track here.
I think an important point to make is that an ecosystem grows back differently after a fire than after it's clear cut. And so there's often this dialogue of how old is a tree as being the only signifier for the quality of an ecosystem, of that the ecosystem's old or it's young. Yet the Elliott State Forest is an ecosystem that is recovering from fire. So all of the biomass is the term they use, that was in the forest was still in the forest when it was regrowing. So it regrew, the succession of species was allowed to happen, versus when a place is clear cut, most of the topsoil is removed, all of the large animals and plants are removed, and basically what happens is they replant a singular species that is not how a stand of forest would naturally evolve. So it is still, the parts that have not been logged are still like old ecosystems. They still have the plants that are native to the area, and they will still come back just as beautifully. So that's
well, the trees are very big also.
Yeah,
they're huge trees. And a significant thing in our campaign is that, this part of the coastal range is one of the last remaining ecosystems for endangered species that depend on coastal temperate rainforest. Mm-hmm. So there's species that they're not necessarily doing well, but they're doing okay, that depend on, they can live in any old growth that exists, whether it's far from the ocean or close to the ocean. But there's species like the marbled murrelet, or certain species of salmon that, the marbled murrelet's a seabird that nests in old growth. And they really depend on these stands of old growth ecosystems on the coast that are in the vicinity of the ocean. The coastal range has been much harder hit by industrial logging than any other part of Oregon. And it's really sad, and part of it is just because of where the lines were drawn, really. So the lines were drawn so that most of the national forest land is in the Cascade Range to the east, and there's the Sayusla National Forest. There's some other pockets of federal land, but most of the Coast Range is private or state, and been managed very poorly against the best interests of a sustained ecosystem.
So you mentioned that there was a fire that went through, but I think it is important to sort of remind people that fires burn in like more of a mosaic pattern as well. So to say that the Tillamook had a large, almost standard replacement fire back I think with the 40s or something. Mm-hmm. But just because there was a fire in there doesn't mean there was like a devastated like moonscape. Mm-hmm. There's still many trees in the Elliott that are 6 feet plus diameter. So we could all be sitting inside the trunk of some of the trees right now that are present in the Elliott that have no real protections to them, and so that they're pretty much free range as far as once the timber sills are drawn up. This is it's definitely some of the most egregious logging that's taking place right now. Not to say, there's the important caveat of saying not that the National Forest has completely cleaned up their act. There's still a bunch of National Forest issues that are, sales specifically, that are pretty horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So in our campaign, I would say the Elliott campaign started tentatively in 2009. There was a group of people following a West Coast Earth First rendezvous who blockaded a timber sale, and they were extracted after about 4 days, and that was kind of the extent of the action at that time. But it did bring the issue to the larger media, and then it was taken up as an issue by Cascadia Wildlands, a nonprofit that's based out of Eugene. Since then, Cascadia Wildlands has been trying very hard to seek legal protection of this place, and they've done petition drives and they've hosted public hikes, and they haven't really had much luck getting the state to actually pay attention and to make a serious effort to decouple our school funding from the management of these state forests. Recently, Cascadia Forest Defenders, last summer we blockaded again, and we were there for about a week before we were extracted. Afterwards, we headed over to stay with a local family in Allegheny, which is probably you've never heard of Allegheny. It's a tiny town that's just east of Coos Bay, and it's on the Millicoma River, just downstream from where most of the active logging is happening in the Elliott. There's a family there they had the land above their property clear cut over the summer, and they weren't really notified about it beforehand, so they had called us in, and we did some smaller actions, did some solidarity with them, helped them get some media, and helped them get talking with some lawyers. Since then, we've been putting a lot of pressure on the state land board, trying to get the governor to actually pay attention to this issue. I think I would like to say that he's paying attention now because he has to. Just this year, we've been escalating a little bit. We dumped a pile of dead Christmas trees in front of his driveway, and then we went to the state land board itself, where he was presiding and did some disruptive things at the meeting, and we mic checked it. So our campaign is still active, even though we're not in the woods at the moment, and we're definitely ramping up for a big summer of action. This is a really important year for the Elliott campaign because Cascadia Wildlands has successfully filed a lawsuit against the state for the new plan that they have in play, and what they're saying is that the clear cutting 850 acres a year, the state is not adequately protecting the marble murrelet as it's obligated to do under the Endangered Species Act. With that lawsuit on the table, we can expect that any escalation we do in the forest could possibly buy time for the lawsuit. If there's stuff that could be saved under the lawsuit that they have failed to get an injunction for, basically, it could be logged while the lawsuit is in process. So we're really here. CFD is really here to bring public attention to the issue and to possibly actively stop things from happening, stop things from being logged that could be saved later.
Beautiful. Do you have something you'd like to say?
Oh, just it's going to be a long battle, pretty much, trying to force these state land issues into more of the public eye, and so it's going to be something that has to be sort of kept hammering at, because this is not a situation where we're going to have like an instant win by any means, but through constant pressure, we're going to hopefully change the entire dynamic of the discussion of the forestry, like the foresting in the state. And I mean, it really do need to sort of directly address, as Grace is saying, about the school fund, is that it's not a choice between big trees and school funds. With the amount of money that's represented that's coming out of the Elliott is being so minimal to the actual school fund, I think it's more important to think of well, what do you want? So what do you want to be representing to these school children? Do you want to represent to them that you value sort of intact native ecosystems, or that you're going to cut down a tree, you're going to decimate this landscape for maybe supporting their school lunches for a day, So it seems to be an obvious choice, at least in my mind, that we need to have more value on the forests, and sort of if anything, showing more preservation ethic than just clear cutting for a short-term gain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, the Common School Fund mandate is causing them to do things that don't make economic sense. when Ted Wheeler, the state treasurer, was asked why they needed to change, I mean, they were meeting the mandate before by logging only 500 acres a year. They said they needed to meet the mandate now by logging 850 acres. When he was asked why they had to change, he said that the market is bad right now, so they have to log more to make the same amount of money, which is just, it's bad economics, and it's not good for the long-term health of the industry even to be logging all of the biggest trees when the market is bad. And it's kind of offensive that they would treat this very rare ecosystem as though it was so expendable that they could just like crunch numbers like that. Like, we'll just like cut a little bit more of this thing that will never exist again once it's gone.
Mm-hmm. And it sort of sets up this dichotomy that you were talking about of like children's education versus an ecosystem. And similarly with the treasurer's argument, it's sort of like environmentalists versus jobs in some way, of that we need to make this mandate. And something that seems really egregious to me is that with the economy so far down, so many of the mill jobs, which are historically what a lot of, I don't know the exact figure, but many more jobs are in the mills than in the actual, like on the actual forest themselves, that also the jobs are leaving too. So when it's the whole of like environmentalists, like these things can't be protected because we have to, you know, our economy's not doing well, we need to create more jobs, that the logic isn't really faulty of that you need to cut more. And so that's something that concerns me a lot. There's a lot of
the jobs aren't actually being created,
yeah,
because most of the material is being exported to China.
Yeah, go to Coos Bay and see their giant timber yard, all like marked to export, mm-hmm. which is the state within, at least in the Elliott, there's sort of like they're not supposed to cut trees from the Elliott that are marked for export, mm-hmm. But that's direct export. If there's like a single middleman between that process, they can export the logs. So if I think they mill it, just like strip the bark off, like do minimal sort of processing, they can then feel free to ship it off to China. Mm-hmm. And one thing, I mean, just quickly, because I'm trying to think about sort of some of the excuses that they're using, specifically on the Elliott. I think I've heard them say that they're cutting trees. The annual growth percentage rate is higher than the amount of biomass they're removing from the forest, and so it's growing more than they're taking out. I mean, it might sound sort of interesting, but the reality is as an ancient ecosystem has a very low annual growth percentage rate. Like an apex forest, an actual truly functioning ecosystem doesn't have a lot of annual growth percentage rate. And so when you look at national forests that have a high growth percentage rate, that is generally indicative of that it's trying to regenerate, either perhaps after something natural like a fire, but most likely after a series of clear cutting. And so more biomass is being sort of generated in that forest as it's recovering from like a clear cut than it is as maintaining sort of its natural apex status. And so when you hear the sort of annual growth percentage rate, it's growing more than we're taking out, that's generally a sign of poor forest management, and that you don't want to be having a high growth percentage rate, and you want to have a very low percentage growth rate for if your goal is a well-maintained, healthy apex forest ecosystem. So
that's a good point, Ken.
Well, the truth on the ground is the most important thing. I think what motivated me to get involved with the Elliott State Forest and probably CFD in general was I think the first time I went, I was just doing a photo project for a journalism class, and I had a friend who had done some stuff with CFD, and I was like, well, I want to do this photo project about forest fence. Can you take me to where the last blockade was in 2009? So I went with them, and to visit the Elliott as it is now is a place where you see a terrible contrast between what a forest could be and what it is in most places. And so you can walk through a beautiful intact timber sale that's like a cathedral, and that's full of these huge Doug firs, and there's this diverse range of other species in the canopy, the hemlock, the cedar, chickapin, and all these other trees. And then you can walk you can crest the hill, and there's a clear cut on the other side. And it looks like the way you would treat, like if you were an invading army, it looks like the way you would treat the land if you wanted to completely destroy it, so it would never be good again. It's like they take everything, they strip everything, they spray herbicides on it afterwards. They deliberately kill native species like the mountain beaver so that they won't compete with the new monocrop of Doug fir seedlings that they plant. So to actually be on the ground and see the difference between an old growth ecosystem and what they're creating afterwards is the real truth in the matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another tactic that people were using to try and advocate for the Elliott State Forest, the work to saving it, was in the fall. Members of Northwest Ecosystem Survey Team that Gedden touched on at the beginning of the show went out and surveyed from Robert B. Orletz. And one of the first sale that we surveyed was called Commodus, and it's on this ridgeline where it's really long. It's a pretty, 2 hours, like almost, of driving once you're actually in the Elliott to reach it. And it has a clear cut going down one ridge on one side, a clear cut going down the ridge on the other side, and then it's this beautiful forest. Like, I think the average age of the tree was 130 years. And it's interesting because from where you're standing at the top of the road, you can see a very stark contrast between a clear cut, the forest, but then directly on the other side of the ridge is a marble murrelet management area, which is what we were talking about, an ecosystem that's already protected. So it was very clear of like one way it could be, the other way it could be. And it was really, distressing. So
on national forest land, they say they don't do clear cuts anymore. They say that they do shelter wood cuts, which is really just
regen harvest.
Well, it's kind of a smokescreen. It's still crap. But on the Elliott, they unapologetically still actively do clear cuts. Like, they are actively clear cutting like old growth stands in the Elliott. So it happens. It's happening now. It's happening continually in the Elliott. I think one of the justifications they used was that in the national forest there are certain criteria for the slope percentage that things can be logged on. If it's too severe of a slope, they either can't log it or have to have special precautions. The Elliott, it's all incredibly rugged, all incredibly steep, and so they're sort of like, well, so that's a twofold thing. Like, they say, like, oh, well, we can't have slope percentage sort of requirements in the Elliott because everything is so steep, and we have to clear cut when we cut in the Elliott because it's so steep, it's unsafe to try to not clear cut it. So they're actively converting the Elliott State Forest into a barren sort of wasteland, and they're removing the entire nutrient load of all those trees as well, so the regeneration is even more impacted.
Mm-hmm.
The human effect, and I think that our campaign started without thinking too hard about the way the logging was impacting people downstream, and then once we linked up with this family who was living on the Millicoma, that's started to shape the campaign as well, to think about the way that that sort of logging affects the landscape and the likelihood of landslides. And now we've talked to people who have had basically the river change course that goes through the bottom floor of their house, kind of thing. And also just to consider the amount of spraying that's happening upriver from where people are like raising their children. And I think that's an angle that, if I'm going to be honest, we haven't worked on enough. But that is very real to the people who live there, and that we need to work on more.
Yeah. The more time I spend down there, the more like concerned I am about the community of Coos Bay in general. One thing that people have been fighting liquefied natural gas, import for a long time, but only recently the one in Jordan Cove, which is down in Coos Bay, that terminal was also export. So the plan for the LNG terminal down in Coos Bay is to basically push the harbor back, dredge it out, and then have the power plant for the export terminal on land, like on sand taken from the bed. And this is about 2 miles from the actual city of North Bend and 3 or 4 from Coos Bay, and right at the end of the Oregon Dunes Park. And then that's liquefied natural gas, which will also involve a 100-meter wide clear cut going from Klamath Falls all the way to Coos Bay, going directly through that community, going over 2 mountain ranges. That's LNG. Another thing that recently came to our attention in Eugene was the issue of coal export, also possibly going out through there. Do you want to touch on that, or?
I'll touch on it briefly. It's just that there's no major environmental organizations based out of Coos Bay, and there's not really a cultural resistance there to really nasty projects that destroy land and destroy people's homes. So it seems to me that there's a trend of corporations targeting this area for things that they might not get away with in other places. Right now, there's coal companies that are courting the port of Coos Bay to try to export coal out of Coos Bay, which would also involve more dredging and coal trains coming through the community. So I don't really want to get too much into that now, but I think it's relevant.
Yeah. So that's a little bit about what the Iliad State Forest is, and that's been the campaign and sort of focus of CFD for the last 2+ years. But there's definitely other projects we'd work on, and I was out surveying with Nest when Occupy started. It was really crazy driving in and getting news and being like, holy crap, holy goodness. In Eugene, where I live, all these people that I don't know, some people that I do know, are getting really excited and enthused, and that it sounds like a lot of really amazing thing happens. I never thought that I might be an activist in a post-activist scarcity world. And so Occupy was really excited for me, and periodically we've worked, Cascadia Forest Defenders has worked on and off with Occupy Eugene and some with Occupy Portland, and as we spoke earlier, various Earth First groups across the country have worked with occupations. On November 17th, some of you may recall Bank Shutdown Day, where Cascadia Forest Defenders targeted Quad Bank. There was banner hangs. It was all well and good. And we were around when the occupation was being evicted, and that was very stressful for all of us. And the last little while, we've been talking with Geneva and various other people from Occupy Eugene about Occupy the Trees. And so we thought, that's been a project of ours that we've wanted to take on. It's just that within the Occupy movement, promoting more environmental awareness, more environmental critique. And so we were really excited when someone was putting on an Occupy the Trees event. So we figured, while we have time on the show, we should talk about Occupy the Trees. So
awesome. Yes, I think that was the first time that I worked with you, was in front of the bank. My children laid in front of there as that banner got dropped. So Occupy the Trees is an action that's supported by Occupy Eugene and is in solidarity with Occupy Wall Street. It'll begin April 22nd. And the purpose of it is it's a 5-day event to highlight the corporate entities that are responsible for the exploitation of our natural resources in our region. This is an international action that local groups can jump on board with in order to highlight the environmental destruction that's going on in their region locally. So here in the Cascadia bioregion, we've connected with Cascadia Forest Defense and the Earth Firsters in this area in order to jump on the campaigns and highlight them a little bit more clearly to the general public. Also to draw a clear line as to where the Occupy movement and the environmental movements are clearly related to one another, and how we can really steamroll this and be powerful together. And yeah, we have a message that goes together. So from the 22nd of April through the 27th of April, we will be doing urban tree sits that will highlight the campaigns that continue to go on to hopefully stop the destruction that's happening in our backyard. Is there anything I missed on that?
That's awesome. I'm really excited about that. I think you hit on a good point of just that Occupy and environmental movement have a lot of common cause of that. It is a small, and Gedden spoke to it a little bit, of that it's a small group of people who in some ways are responsible for the vast majority of environmental destruction, and that's something we all should be concerned about. You mentioned that it's 5 days. Do you want to go into sort of what the focus of those 5 days are?
I mean, we do have a schedule. It's posted up on the Facebook page as far as...
What's the Facebook page name under?
Occupy the Trees.
Sweet.
Okay. And it's kind of laid out pretty broadly so far. A couple different things. We do have Monday will be a day that we will be explaining kind of what the Cascadia bioregion is and why we are using the bioregion instead of state lines to bring environmental concerns to the forefront. So that will be one day. Monsanto will also probably be a target in this because Monsanto is responsible for the spraying that goes on after the clear cuts that do directly affect the communities other than the wildlife in those areas. We've worked with the people of Triangle Lake who've been directly affected by the spraying of the clear cuts, and obviously the families close to and the people close to the Elliott State Forest are experiencing the same effects of this spraying. And Monsanto being one of the corporations that people understand pretty clearly to be of the 1%. And I think people need to understand a little bit better as far as how much control they actually have in this destruction and what they can do personally and locally to empower themselves. I would suggest going up on Occupy the Trees and looking at what's been posted there as far as the schedule goes and where to plug in. It's 3 weeks from now. There's still a lot of work to do on this campaign and this action.
Totally. And should we talk about our involvement with that for a second?
Sure. I mean, Cascadia Forest Defenders is very much going to be a part of this action. Some of it will become more public as the event draws nearer, but we plan to participate in the putting up of urban tree sits. We're hoping to really to have at least one tree sit that really focuses in on the issue of state forest policy, and I don't know. I think we're all really excited about that. Urban tree sitting is a fun way to create a public spectacle, and it's also really a good way for us to connect with the Occupy movement. I think that people in CFD are really looking forward to this collaboration because it's just a great opportunity to find a nexus between the two issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Beautiful. Anything you want to add about Occupy the Trees?
I think the people of the Occupy movement are also really excited to be able to work with the Earth Firsters and the Cascadia Forest Defenders also, and be able. There are a lot of environmentalists that came into the Occupy movement because it was really clear to us what the root problems were and how directly related they were to the environment, and it seems to have kind of gotten lost in the politics thus far in the Occupy movement, and so there is definitely a lot of excitement to be connected with other environmentalist groups and campaigns that are current.
Totally. I want to take the last segment of our show here to talk about a lot of different ways that you can plug in, not just to, as Geneva mentioned, Occupy the Trees, the 22nd through 27th, but there's this conception a lot of times that, Earth First or some of us are kind of separate, but really we want you. We want you to come out to the woods with us. We want to train with you. We want to work with you. We want to hear your ideas. We want to hear your thoughts. And if you have a campaign that you want to work on, then we can probably help in some ways. We've given a lot of workshops. We've given a lot of logistical support. We can help in a lot of ways. And so we're really excited to have people come in. So we're going to talk about some things we have coming up. So I want to start with SLB.
Well, I'd say the first way to plug in is that we have weekly meetings, Fridays, 5 p.m. at the Growers Market. We meet very regularly and on time, and you should come at 5 p.m. on Fridays, Growers Market. We have a website that will be posted at the end, forestdefensenow.com, and we're on Facebook as Cascadia Forest Defenders. It's like a person named Cascadia as first name and Forest Defenders as last name. So you can friend us. And we're also going to start having weekly climb trainings. I think, that's a really great way to plug in. It's really fun. Wednesdays in the morning, 11 a.m. At the Lorax, 1648 Alder. We'll be there. Many of us have a lot of experience climbing and can teach you how to safely climb a tree. And what else? Coming up, there's a state land board meeting coming up, but I don't know if we're going to go to that or not.
Okay.
So I don't want to talk about that right now. So I think the next big thing, besides Occupy the Trees, is we're helping organize a regional Earth First rendezvous. I think you should talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So, as you mentioned, Earth First, it has annually, there's a rendezvous, and the focus, and it happens differently in a different place every year, and the focus is to gather everyone from across the country, have us all meet up, sing songs, get naked, have workshops, plan things, and it's just sort of like
not get naked
if you're getting. It's sort of like a cultural pollination as well as a chance to share stories, share successes, and have a critical mass of people come from out of town to give your campaign some help. And so, like Grace mentioned, in 2009, it was a rendezvous situation that got things really rolling in the Elliott. So this year, the national rendezvous is in upstate New York, where the group is fighting shale. It's called Marcellus. The group is Marcellus Shale Earth First. I wish I had the website written down for.
They're fighting fracking.
Fracking.
LNG fracking.
Crap. And that is happening July 1st through 7th. But since that rendezvous is 3,000 miles away, it's a long way for many of us to go, and the rendezvous are such good situations for communities to come together, for people to work together, for people to really bring some heat. We decided to have our own. So this year, from June 20th to June 25th, the Tillamook and Clatsop are basically due west of Portland, a little bit south of there. We'll post the directions when the time is right. We're going to have a big gathering. There's going to be lots of workshops. If you want to learn how to climb trees, if you want to learn how to do activist media, if you want to learn how to do legal observer trainings, just everything that can. We're going to try and have workshops that will basically teach every facet of being an activist, as well as you get a chance to hear a lot of old stories, get a chance to be out in the woods with some of your best friends for a week, and maybe make new best friends. And we also really, a big goal of this rendezvous is to sort of open the doors a little bit, in that there's been, in Portland and in Eugene, there has been just so much growth of activist potential with the Occupy movement and subsequent spin-offs, or I'd say groups that were inspired by the Occupy movement. And we really want to bring that in. We really want to have this a place where occupiers feel welcome. We really want to have this as a place where other people who feel who have also just decided, people who now identify as activists as well, can come to this space, and we can all train each other, we can all share with each other, and try and together chart a course forward for our campaigns. So some of the issues that we'll be talking about and working towards is wolf kill, coal and coal export, and of course state forestry issues, which we've talked a lot about here. So that's the 20th through 25th. In the next couple of days, there's going to be a website of June. It's an important thing to clarify. June 20th through 25th. The next couple of days, there's going to be relentless spamming in your email about this event, but there's going to be a website up. The event's called Earth First Cascadia Regional Rendezvous, and stay tuned for more updates on that for sure. Okay. Do you want to talk about Climbers Camp?
Well, a few other things too. So, I mean, hopefully everyone has their pen and paper out to write these dates down. But so yeah, June 20th, June 25th is the Earth First Cascadian Regional Rendezvous. Also, June 16th through June 24th, if people have any ability to go to Colorado, and there's another group that's been going on. It's been happening annually. The Wild Roots Feral Futures. It's definitely not necessarily. It's geared towards more sort of wilderness survival kind of primitive skills gathering, and that's June 16th through the 24th in Colorado. So but unfortunately it conflicts with where I will be, which is the Earth First Cascadian Regional Rendezvous. And as well as was pushed on, and after that, there will be people leaving from here to go to the National Rendezvous in New York, which is once again July 1st through July 7th in upstate New York. It's the National Earth First Rendezvous. And then we'll be back in Cascadia from July 14th to July 20th. The Earth First Climbers Guild is going to be having a camp, probably most likely in the Mount Hood National Forest. And we've had a few events. Most recently, we had one in Florida, which Grace was talking about, which went off really well. And it's just it's like more of an intensive, specific to climbing and canopy occupation and blockading. That's going to be happening. We're happening in mid-July, and so there. I think it's also the Earth Climbers Guild website is going to be sort of put up on the TV as well. But so really sort of stay tuned and get plugged in to specifically the Forest Defense Now and the Earth First Climbers Guild websites for more information about things that are coming up. This really is sort of our implicit invitation to everybody to come and be active. If you want to sort of stand with us in sort of defense of the natural world, then this is sort of like the best way we have for you to is for us to extend an invitation out. And so please become involved. It doesn't matter if you have any experience. It doesn't matter if you think that you can't, if you question your ability to contribute, because you can always contribute something. Like we want individuals to come help us and help stand with us. And so the most important thing to do initially is to take that sort of the impetus to stand, the will, and we would love to have you around.
We have folks that help out tremendously with forest activism who can't actually physically leave Eugene very often, or maybe they can't even physically leave their house, but they still find ways to help out with the campaigns. I would say that a very small percentage of our time, especially not during the summer, I mean, we try to be out in the woods as much as possible, but most of the groundwork is done, doing somewhat more mundane things. And it's a hard truth, but it also means that if you don't feel like you can be out in the woods, or you're not into if you think I can't get arrested ever, or I can't, spend months at a time camping in the woods, I'm afraid of heights. That does not mean at all that there aren't things to do. Media, just doing media, for example, is a huge job. Up until recently, we were doing a very poor job updating our website because everyone who was organizing really just wanted to be out in the woods and not sitting at a computer. But if you're good at stuff like that, we would love to have you helping with that. So just let us know, and we'd love to plug you in with whatever skills you have. Obviously, we also love having people who are good at being in the woods and have skills in that area.
What are some other ways that we could get help? Or what are some other ways that people could contribute to CFD?
Oh, sure. I mean, we take donations. And
money. It's always good.
If you don't have money but you want to help throw a fundraiser for CFD, that would be awesome. We oftentimes have trouble finding time to do fundraisers when we're busy campaigning. So having people do that work for us is awesome. If you have materials to donate, things that might seem useless to you can be very useful to us. Tarps, any kind of rain gear, camping gear, old camping gear, as long as it still is functional, is probably useful to us. I'm trying to think of what other things.
Cars.
You give us a car.
If you have a car that you're just going to trash,
yeah,
take it.
Things like that.
Even if it's a car that doesn't work, we could usually find someone to lock down to it.
Yeah, totally. I knew, I had someone contact me about, that there was a bunch of, plastic sheeting material because somebody had, finished painting something. And so things like that might be garbage to one person, we can use to make banners out of, or use as tarping, that kind of stuff. So if you have any ideas of things that you could donate to us, please contact us.
Or another way you can help out Cascadia Forest Defenders is by donating to a familiar friend, which is the Civil Liberties Defense Center. Same as Occupy Eugene has been incredibly well supported with legal representation by the Civil Liberties Defense Center. So have we. Lauren and the whole team there has defended us for a long time, and I think we all understand that, we may have some very strong feelings about our criminal justice system, but if we're faced alone against it, then then we're really in trouble. So you can also help us out by making sure the Civil Liberties Defense Center can stay afloat and keep their doors open and keep defending activists. So.
And these are some of the local things that are going on, and local ways to get plugged in. But people really should sort of start paying attention to the Earth First as a movement. And the way to do that is to, the easiest thing to do is go to the Earth First Journal's website, just Earth First Journal. I believe it's .com or I'm not sure. If you just look up Earth First Journal, that's a good way to sort of get in contact with sort of the movement newspaper, and the Earth First Newswire as well, which is, I think it's earthfirstnewswire.wordpress.com. Mm-hmm. But subscribe to the Newswire. You can get updates about what's happening internationally as far as Earth First actions go, and not necessarily even just Earth First, but like any actions that are designed and supportive of the preservation of the wild places. And other than that, I strongly encourage everyone to actually physically subscribe to the paper version of the Earth First Journal. It's sort of the movement rag that represents what everyone's doing, and sort of a common common bond between all the Earth First groups internationally. Just don't be if you have any come and talk to us and at the meetings, and I really want people to recognize that Earth First is very approachable, and that we are out there fighting the fight, and we want you to come with us.
Absolutely.
So,
do you have any final questions for us, Ben?
Well, I think I just sort of want to re-emphasize a couple of things we've talked about in this conversation, which is Occupy the Trees is coming up right around the corner. That is April 22nd.
Through 22nd through 27th.
And to be involved, you should
contact me.
As an individual.
Well, no, if you go, the Facebook page is probably the easiest one. If you shout me or somebody out a message through the Facebook page, or if you walk into the Occupy Eugene building right now, or get in contact with anybody who's been an organizer involved in the Occupy, they'd be able to direct you in the right direction to talk to somebody about Occupy the Trees.
And I also want to emphasize we do want to read off these dates really quick. We got about 10 seconds.
All right. Once again, June 16th through June 24th, Wild Roots Feral Futures in Durango, Colorado. June 20th through June 25th, Earth First Cascadian Regional Rendezvous.
All right, that's it. Thank you so much for coming at Occupy TV. Thanks for tuning in.
Yes,
Hope you got it the first time.
Well, we had to.
Well,
being polite.
No, well, you have, yeah, okay. Excellent.
Okay.
Cut.
All right. We're still on camera. Still rolling.
See you in the woods.
See you in the woods. What's woods? Woods.
I don't know. Make a tree.
Do you want to draw a picture of you?
Are we still on camera?
I don't know. It's still rolling.
Can you stop my group hug?
You cut it too soon, Ben.
I did. 15 seconds, not 30. Did anyone say shit or anything?
That's what you get for having Michelle Luddites in front of the camera.
Go back to the woods.
Telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that?